It's finally here then. Let's see what the Blood Angels can gain from the new supplement, Blood of Baal. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been getting very excited about the new Blood of Baal supplement for Psychic Awakening that gives us a whole load more options for the Blood Angels. Between this and chapter approved, there have been a lot of major buffs to the Blood Angels, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they perform as they move forward into the future. It's certainly good to see a major army like Blood Angels get some powerful buffs. They've certainly not been the strongest for quite a while now, aside from their very good Smash Captains. In this review we're going to go over all of their new options, including their new chapter traits, doctrine, litany, updated datasheets, new relics and stratagems, and we'll also go over the Flesh Tearers part of the book, which gives us some extra rules for running a successor army of Flesh Tearers. So without further ado, let's get into it. So starting from the top, we'll talk about Red Thirst. I've already covered this in its own short video over the weekend, but Red Thirst got a lot better in the new book. +1 to wound was already massive. It can provide anywhere between a double damage buff and a 25% increased damage buff, anything provided you're not wounding on 2s already. It's a massive bonus and you get it whenever you charge, were charged or make a heroic intervention. It lets Smash Captains with Thunderhammers wound knights on 3s and regular intercessors punch tanks on a wound roll of 4 up. It's incredibly brutal and was already a very strong rule for the Blood Angels. It's now been augmented by adding +1 to advance and charges on top of that, the same as the Hungry for Battle successor trait out of Codex Space Marines. This is a very solid pairing. It will mean that you're more likely to get a lot of charges off over the course of the battle, particularly your charges out of Deep Strike, which would usually need a 9-inch charge. When you're rolling on an 8-inch, it's a lot better. From the maths from the last video, it bumps you from going to around a 28% chance of making a charge to slightly over 40% chance, and if you're willing to burn a command reroll, the chance gets greater still. There are other ways to buff this charge, such as rerolls, relics, and the Chaplain aura of +2 to charge, but you can't have both this and the Chaplain aura, because the Chaplain aura says it specifically doesn't stack, which is a shame. Overall, this is a really solid boost to Red Thirst. If it even makes you a few more charges over the course of a whole load of games, it will have helped out a lot. Every charge that the Blood Angels make will potentially be a devastating event, and the more charges you get, the better. Combat Doctrines now. The Blood Angels get access to their Combat Doctrines, so they will get an extra AP -1 for heavy weapons in the Devastator Doctrine, assault or rapid fire weapons in the Tactical Doctrine, and of course the AP -1 to grenades and pistols and melee weapons in the Assault Doctrine. They get these bonuses if your entire army is Blood Angels, and like the normal Space Marines, you can't mix and match between successor chapters and Blood Angels. They all have to be one Blood Angels army. Blood Angels of course have their Savage Echoes. This is their unique Assault Doctrine, and it basically gives them +1 attack on the charge when they're charged or make a heroic intervention. We've discussed this in one of the previous videos as well. It's an absolutely phenomenal buff to the assault phase in general. Every unit will get a decent advantage out of this, particularly units with low numbers of strong attacks, such as Terminators with Power Fists, who now with Shock Assault and this Assault Doctrine on turn 3, will be hitting with 4 attacks on the charge, and you could potentially get them up to 6 attacks if you tag the Sanguiner along and cast Unleash Rage on them. The amount of melee buffs that you can stack on any one unit is insane with the Blood Angels, and the amount of stacking you can do has only increased with the new relics and stratagems available to us now. Say if you did go crazy and run a unit of 10 Death Company with jump packs and Thunderhammers for a princely 340 points investment, they would each get 5 attacks on the charge with those Thunderhammers, so 50 Thunderhammer attacks, 25 hits against a knight if we're targeting one of those, 17 wounds, AP -4 will go straight through. So an average of 50 wounds on your knight. Bear in mind that this is with absolutely no character support, and it certainly makes me think that smaller units of Blood Angels elites might well be able to do enough damage on their own. I think it might be really getting to the point where you don't need to invest in enormous great big units, as every single marine is just that ludicrously damaging, particularly from turn 3 onwards. Of course, the major weakness of an Assault Doctrine is that you only access it from turn 3 onwards. You have to wait around in Devastator and Tactical before you can get to this, and that is a big disadvantage, as ideally, as Blood Angels Assault Infantry, we'd typically rather have this turn 1. Unfortunately, in this book there is no way to get this assault doctrine earlier than turn 3. I was certainly looking out for it, and I'm afraid it doesn't seem to have happened, so bad news there. It does make me think that the Blood Angels won't actually mind allying with the other Space Marines or other Imperium factions half as much as some Space Marines with a doctrine that's more helpful in the first couple of turns. I could easily see a Blood Angels Vanguard detachment filled with 3 big units of elites supporting an Imperial Guard gun line, for example. Sure, they won't get the extra attacks turn 3, but they're already hilariously damaging anyway. And if you bring some allies along, they can fill some other battlefield roles, such as being very good at the ranged game, and provide a whole load of cheap scoring infantry and command points. I do definitely think that you could go both ways though. This is a very, very powerful doctrine when you get to it, and you can certainly keep your Blood Angels units off the table till turn 3. But I think that you can just go down very different routes depending on whether you build for this or whether you don't, and I think that both options could certainly be viable in competitive play. I think we'll go for Chaplain litanies next. Blood Angels get access to the whole shebang of regular Space Marine Chaplain litanies now. The litany to reroll all rolls to hit in close combat is obviously still very powerful with them. You could get that Death Company squad with the Thunderhammers up to doing 75 damage to a knight in one turn, should you feel the need for absolute massive overkill. Their other combat litanies are interesting, and they do of course have the litanies for +1 to hit and +1 to wound the nearest unit if you're playing some Blood Angels ranged units. And honestly, I think in a good competitive list you will probably have to. If you're going pure, I don't think the Blood Angels are just going to be a melee only army. Ranged options just add too much value even if they aren't the most optimal army to make the best use of ranged units. The Blood Angels do have their new litany as well, the Invocation of Destruction. Basically this one gives you the old rending rule, back from the heady heights of 7th edition. Your Chaplain picks a Blood Angels unit within 6 inches, and on unmodified wound rolls in the fight phase of a 6, the attack becomes AP -4. Now this is clearly going to be strongest on a flurry of low strength attacks, where you can expect a whole bunch of 6s and the attacks have fairly bad AP anyway. Say if you had a squad of Death Company intercessors, which we'll get onto later, charging in against a Leman Russ battle tank, something that they'd usually only ever be able to put a couple of dents in close combat. Let's assume that we're not in the Blood Angels unique doctrine at the moment. So they get 4 attacks each, that'd be 40 attacks, and thanks to Red Thirst they'll on average get around about 3 wounds through on the Leman Russ. Not bad for regular infantry against toughness 8 tanks. With the Chaplain's litany, that will actually double up to a mighty 6 wounds on the Russ. Honestly, it's not too bad, it'll certainly help you out against some armoured targets, but I think that it's a little bit situational and doesn't give you the biggest buff to your damage output. It's certainly good, but I'm just not certain that it gives you better than the various powerful auras and other damage buffs that the Blood Angels can access. Let's move on to take a look at the datasheets in this book then. We've got 3 main updates here. I'll cover them briefly now, but I might do a bit more of an in-depth tactical review about them, sometimes over the next 2 weeks. First of all, we have the new very nice Primaris Mephiston. His points cost has dropped to 145 from 160 in the new chapter approved, but otherwise his datasheet is basically the same, aside from him getting the standard Primaris upgrade of +1 attack and +1 wound. He has however gained the Angels of Death special rule, so he gets an extra attack on the charge from Shock Assault, and access to the combat doctrines, which will give him that extra attack again, and an extra AP on Vitaris, his special sword. His stat line is Movement 7, Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 2 up, Strength and Toughness 5, 6 wounds, 5 attacks, Leadership 9 and a 2 up save. He has a Plasma Pistol, Vitaris, Frag Grenades and Crack Grenades, and he's a unique unit. Vitaris is Strength ×2, so Strength 10, AP -3, and Damage D3. He's still the Lord of Death, so he'll have that 5+ Feel No Pain save. That's a real boon against incoming damage. And he has the Psychic Hood, as do all Space Marine Librarians. As before, he can manifest and deny 2 psychic powers, and he knows Smite and 3 psychic powers from the Sanguinary discipline. I typically recommend using Wings of Sanguinius to get him into close combat, unless you're doing similar with a Librarian Dreadnought or something. And it's interesting to note that his datasheet has gained the Chief Librarian keyword. So overall, he's a horrendously fighty, very survivable character, who can know 2 psychic powers from the Sanguinary discipline, at a very reasonable points cost, and an all-round decent character. I certainly think he's going to be a competitive option now he's gained the stat line bonus, gained Shock Assault, and also lost 15 points. He wasn't too bad before, to be honest. Next up we have Chaplain Lamates. He is one of the 2 unique jump pack chaplains in the Blood Angels Codex, and this guy will set you back 100 points. The biggest change to Lamates is that he now gains the litanies of battle. He knows the litany of hate and 2 other litanies from the litanies of battle. In particular with these Blood Angels chaplain characters, the Manta of Strength is an amazing buff on an already very strong unit. Getting extra damage and extra attacks on top of Red Thirst giving +1s to wound just means that he's absolutely going to be brutal against all targets. Of course, the litanies of battle will also be very strong at buffing your other Space Marines. He has a 12-inch move, weapon skill 2 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength, toughness and wounds of 4, 5 attacks, leadership 9 and 3 up save. He's armed with the Blood Crozius and a bolt pistol. The Blood Crozius is a strength +2, AP -2, damage D3 weapon. He has Angels of Death for that +1 attack in Shock Assault and the further attack and AP in the Assault Doctrine. And he still has his Fury Unbound and Guardian of the Lost special rules for buffing Death Company. Fury Unbound allows you to re-roll charges for a Death Company unit within 6 inches of himself. He is Death Company himself, so he will also give this to himself. If he's dropping down alongside Death Company, then that's already quite a decently reliable charge already because of that +1 that they get from the new Red Thirst. I believe it maths out to around about a 75% chance of making the charge just with the +1 to charge and the 8-inch charge alone. So he's absolutely great for supporting Death Company coming in. And he could certainly help out the new Death Company intercessors, which are one of the other tasty new options. His other rule is Guardian of the Lost, which basically lets a friendly Death Company nearby use his leadership instead of their own when taking morale tests, and Death Company are actually surprisingly vulnerable to morale. All around he's a decently strong buffing character, and really the guy that you want to be taking alongside a big unit of Death Company when they're coming in from Deep Strike. Next up we come on to Asterath, who's seen a very similar buff to Lamates. He is now a Chief Chaplain or Master of Sanctity, so he now knows the Litany of Hate and 3 other litanies from the Litany of Battle, and he can recite 2 of them, so a very strong buffing character for just 105 points. He is movement 12 with his jump pack, weapon skill 2 up, ballistic skill 2 up, strength 4, toughness 4, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2 up save, and of course he has his Rosarius for an extra 4 up invul. He has the Executioner's Axe and Frag and Crack grenades. The Executioner's Axe is a strength +2, AP -3, damage D3 weapon, which as an added bonus, if you roll a 6 for the wound roll, gets a flat 3 damage instead of D3. So a pretty nice weapon that will be good against most targets. As well as his very powerful 2 litanies, he also has a couple of important special rules. Firstly, his Redeemer of the Lost. Make Death Company within 6 inches of him fearless, they automatically pass morale test within 6 inches. And friendly Blood Angels can use his leadership instead of their own. His more interesting rule though is Massive Doom, which you can use once per battle at the start of your movement phase, and you roll a d6 for each friendly Blood Angels infantry unit within 6 inches of the model and apply the result. On a 1 they're very unhappy and just take 1 mortal wound. On a 2 to 5 they get Dark Wrath, where they'll basically add 1 to their hit rolls until the end of the turn when in close combat. And on a 6 they add 1 to their hit rolls and also get a 4 up invul save. It's a nice fun little special rule that, but I think that the main reason that you bring this guy are for 2 litanies on a chaplain, which really isn't too bad for 105 points when you also get his fighting melee profile thrown in. This is just an extra little once per battle effect that can really buff those melee units. He might be a good choice to keep in your backline, jump out to meet a deep striking Blood Angels unit and apply his nice litany buffs and Massive Doom to them. Next we'll move on to the Death Company Intercessors, which are an interesting option that I like a lot. They're an elite choice for Codex Blood Angels, and they cost 18 points a model each. You buy them in squads of 5, and you can buy an extra 5 as per the normal Intercessor squad rules. They're exactly the same in terms of war gear options as the Intercessor squad. You can take the auto bolt rifles, stalker bolt rifles, or the regular bolt rifles. I suspect that people might well want to be taking the auto bolt rifles on them as they'll be advancing towards the enemy, and typically 3 shots at strength 4 on the move, when they can even advance if they need to get closer. It's all generally going to be good. One thing to note is that they don't get a Sergeant upgrade, you just merely get the standard Intercessor profile for every model. So their maximum leadership 7, and the Sergeant doesn't get 3 attacks. Despite this, you can still equip one of them like a Sergeant, so one can take a Thunderhammer or Power Fist or Power Sword if you like. I typically would do this even though you don't have the extra attack from being a sergeant, because of course you do have the extra attack for being Death Company when they charge. They have Angels of Death, so they get +1 attack from Shock Assault. They'll have Bolter Discipline if they do choose the standard bolt rifles, as their guns will benefit depending on whether they're in the Tactical Doctrine or Devastator Doctrine. Of course, in the Assault Doctrine, with the extra attack from Blood Angels, they're going to have an absolute boatload of attacks. They have the normal benefits that Black Rage brings, so that will give them an extra attack on the charge, and it will give them a 6-up Feel No Pain type save. Blood Angels Intercessors were already pretty damn scary to any sort of middle strength infantry, due to having a lot of attacks, and having +1 to wound in the assault phase makes them a genuine scary threat to most targets. These turn this up to 11 by having the additional attack, and if they're in the Blood Angels Assault Doctrine, then they'll be spitting out 5 attacks apiece on the charge, all at AP -1. Even one of these guys could cause major damage if he reaches a fairly squishy infantry squad. I'd actually say that the second part of Black Rage, the 6-up Feel No Pain, is actually the main benefit that the Death Company Intercessors get. It is really helpful on multi-wound models, particularly when you're being targeted by damage 2 weapons. Against damage 1 weapons, it will generally increase your durability by 20% due to your chance of passing saves on wounds that you've already passed. A 6-up Feel No Pain against damage 2 weapons actually gives them a 33% durability boost, provided they're being hit by a lot of damage 2 shots at once. This is because you get 2 chances at a 6-up Feel No Pain save against any single damage 2 shot, and then if it doesn't kill the model, then the next damage 2 shot is forced to only kill that same model that's already been wounded, so it really blunts their efficiency quite badly. This is exactly what Intercessors need to be more survivable and more versatile on the battlefield, so I really like the Death Company Intercessors. The only downside for me is that they're an elite's choice rather than a troop's choice, which means that you're not going to be able to use them for filling your battalions and generating your command points, and with all the bonus close combat stratagems that Blood Angels get, Blood Angels really like their command points. I'd say for 18 points per model though, they are basically flatly better Intercessors, and I certainly think they'd be a solid option to include in Blood Angels armies. They could perhaps act as a bit of a bully threat to occupy the middle of the board, and delete enemy screens, while your assault infantry drop down from the skies to strike at the heart of the enemy army, turn 2 or turn 3. So that's it for the data sheets. I believe that all of them could certainly be used as part of an efficient Blood Angels army. I think Games Workshop has done a good job of making them all usable, without making anything that's clearly obviously undercosted. They've also reprinted a bunch of the Phobos and newer Space Marine units for inclusion with the Blood Angels, so if you wanted their datasheet in an official format, you have that now. The ones included are the Phobos Lieutenant, Captain and Librarian, the Invicta Tactical Warsuit, Eliminators, Suppressors, Impulsors and Repulsor Executioners, so it's a good way of having these rules to hand if you exclusively play Blood Angels. I think that we'll take a look at the Blood Angels relics from this book now. They've received an update very similar to the supplement books for the Codex Space Marines. Basically, they have a bunch of relics that are Blood Angels only relics that they can give to successor chapters as well via a 1-point stratagem called Honoured by Baal. In addition to this, they also have some special issue war gear. Let's look at the Blood Angels specific relics first though. First up we have Decimator, which is a relic auto bolt rifle. It's an Assault 3 weapon that has 24-inch range, but it's got an upgraded strength to have Strength 5, AP -2, and flat 2 damage. To be honest, for one command point, it's not the worst investment in the world. It'll probably rack you up an extra kill or 2 over the course of the game. I wouldn't build around this though. I'd only ever really consider it if I was using it on a character that had an auto bolt rifle anyway. Secondly, we have the one that was previewed on the Warhammer community site, Biomantic Sarcophagus. You give this to your Librarian Dreadnought and his powers have plus 6-inch range, and you can reroll 1 dice when you're casting a psychic test per turn, and 1 dice when you're rolling to deny an enemy per turn. That's quite a nice little combination. Basically, it's likely to pay for itself if you are thinking that you're going to be re-rolling at least 2 dice for psychic tests over the course of the game. Sometimes you just absolutely need a power to go off. Particularly with Blood Angels, it's going to be something like Unleash Rage or Wings of Sanguinius, both of which are very major powers and could be a big swing as to whether or not they do go off. The plus 6-inch range isn't too bad either. Maybe it might make people take a second look at something like Blood Boil, but it just gives you a little bit of extra versatility and flexibility. Third, we have the Figure of Death. This is a relic Crozius that's worse than the one in the Space Marine Codex. Sorry about that, Figure of Death, but I'm not massively impressed. It's basically a Crosius that gives +1 strength, AP -2, a flat damage 2, and if the enemy is wounded by this, they have a -2 leadership penalty until the end of your turn. Maybe it could work when combined with the Mantra of Strength Chaplain Litany to buff all of his stats, or possibly it could work as some sort of wider leadership debuff strategy, but I'm not sure it's one that I would take personally. Next we have Wrath of Baal, which is a relic banner that you can give to the Sanguinary Ancient. Basically at the start of your turn, if you're starting next to some other jump pack units, then those jump pack units get +2 inches to their movement. Now movement is important to the Blood Angels army, but I'm just not sure if this is enough of a buff to be worth it. I suspect a lot of the time you're just going to have your jump infantry units descending from on high to charge out of Deep Strike, or have Death Company jumping up the board via Forlorn Fury, and this won't help with that because that happens before the movement phase. And either way, 2 inches extra movement isn't the biggest deal in the world to a unit that already moves 12 inches. I think I'd probably pass this myself. It'd have to be a little bit better a buff to movement for me to want to play it that much. Finally, we have another relic jump pack, so this one's going to be contending with the Angel's Wing from the main codex. Gleaming Pinions gives you an additional +1 to your charge, and you can fall back and charge too. This will combine with Red Thirst to give you a 7-inch charge out of Deep Strike, which has a 58% chance of making it even with no rerolls. I'd say that this is decently good. You really want to be making those charges. The fallback out of combat and charge again certainly means that your opponent can't just ignore your Smash Captain if he's locked up with a bunch of chaff infantry. I have had it before in the past where you can get charged by a whole swarm of infantry models and your few Thunderhammer attacks just aren't ever going to get through them. This will let you ignore that, so it's really going to have to force your opponent to deal with the guy or face the consequences next turn. I'm honestly not sure if I'd run this instead of Angel's Wing. Ignores Overwatch and reroll charges. It's a really potent little bundle, and I'd probably take Angel's Wing over this in most situations. It is nice that you can give 2 Smash Captains 2 different snazzy methods of getting into close combat though. It means that you can get the most out of multiple characters. Now for the special issue war gear then. We've gained the 4 standard pieces of kit that are from all the supplement books. Mastercrafted weapon for +1 damage is almost certainly the best pick of the bunch. Blood Angels characters are already notoriously fighty, as now you can bump 1 up to flat damage 4 with a Thunderhammer, which is going to make a nasty mess of any heavy hitter that he touches. If we're running the potential numbers on a Smash Captain, for this and a command point investment, we could have 8 attacks with our Thunderhammer on the charge. If we have a Captain with Death Company for an extra attack, Shock Assault for an extra attack, and then we do the stratagem that gives you an additional D3 attacks on the charge, we'll be up to 8 attacks with a flat 4 damage Thunderhammer. So that's good for around about 4 unsaved wounds on a night, so 16 damage before you've even decided if you want to fight again or not. And that's assuming that you're not even in the Blood Angels unique doctrine, which would give them yet another attack and +1 AP. Digital weapons are like always passable. They give you an extra attack in close combat that will do a mortal wound if you hit. The Adamantine Mantle could maybe give some additional survivability with a 5+ feel no pain, as can Artificer Armor with a 2-up save and a 5-up invul. Their unique options in this special issue war gear are the Flesh Render grenades. These are 6-inch grenade 3, strength 5, AP -3, damage 2, ignores cover grenades, which to be fair are pretty powerful. I just don't think that you're going to get the option to throw these many times. If you're charging out of Deep Strike, you'll get absolutely no chance to throw these, and once you've made contact with the enemy, there's no guarantee your character's going to survive a second round to throw them. And in any case, I'd much rather spend a relic point, giving whichever fighty character it is +1 damage with the Mastercrafted weapon, compared with giving them this. The next 2 relics are really interesting though. Firstly, we have Quake Bolts, which is the Blood Angels unique bolter ammunition, and frankly they are my favourite out of any of the unique bolter ammunition that we've seen so far. The Quake Bolts will let you fire 1 shot with the bolt weapon, and if it hits, then the target is felled until the end of the turn. You still get to do the damage with the bolt weapon you're using, but if you attack the felled unit in melee in the same turn, then you get +1 to hit against them. This is actually absolutely massive, as you could potentially be amping up, say, a Death Company squad by giving them +25% damage boost, just literally by taking a pot shot at a unit with this weapon. Death Company hitting on 2s certainly sounds amazing to me. There's very little that they're not going to be able to tear apart with that. I've certainly been considering taking this on something like a Phobos Captain with his long-range sniper rifle weapon. If you're going to get more use by getting +1 to hit on a melee unit compared with trying to snipe a character, then he could be providing a massive buff to your army with this. Finally, and perhaps best, we have the icon of the angel. Basically, any unit within 3 inches gets to reroll any of the charge dice when they're making a charge. Now the wording on this is very good because it means that you can either reroll both dice or reroll 1 dice, making it basically the same as the Black Templars chapter trait. Now this is the exact thing that you want to be jumping down with your assault jump infantry units to make charges out of deep strike. An 8-inch charge with a reroll is around about 64% chance to go off, and the fact that you can reroll just 1 of the dice makes it even more powerful. The aura of the icon is small, so essentially you're going to be limited to buffering the character himself and probably 1 or 2 units. But you can make sure that they're absolutely massive units if you really wanted to. If you're going hell for leather, you could have 15 Death Company on one side of this guy and 10 Sanguinary Guard on the other, and they'll be getting pretty nice reliable charges to get into the action. I'd say that this one is my favourite of the new relics, with the Flesh Render, with the Quake Bolts mastercrafted weapon, and the Jump Pack relic being all very usable as well. One downside that I've seen with these relics though is that there's no similar stratagem that I can see in this book to the Space Marines, where they can just pay 1 command point for an additional relic. You're still stuck with the 1 for your Warlord, an extra CP if you want 1, or 3 command points if you want 2 extra. I really thought they might have taken the opportunity to fix that in Blood of Baal, but it seems that they haven't. This does mean that you're going to be limited to just 3 relics, and that's if you commit 3 CP, so make your choices wisely. Stratagems next then, and this book has lots. The majority are reprints from the Codex Space Marines, obviously stratagems that Games Workshop feels that every chapter would have access to, so I'd look out for these in the Psychic Awakening books for Dark Angels and Space Wolves, which I'm sure will be coming out in the near future. We'll whiz through these quickly. For 1 command point we have Duty Eternal, that epic Dreadnought stratagem that lets you half the incoming damage characteristic. This will be amazing on Librarian Dreadnoughts, which are already very strong, very powerful pieces. It will make your opponent have to work hard to get rid of them. Hunter Slayer missiles, not a bad choice at all on a Repulsor or Repulsor Executioner, if you desperately need that extra D3 mortal wounds to finish off a big target at the end of a shooting phase. Big Guns lets you move and shoot a vehicle as if it has been stationary for heavy weapons. Fury of the First will give you +1 to hit with Terminators in 1 phase, particularly on a Blood Angels Terminator squad charging in to assault the enemy. This could give you a very respectable damage increase. Masterful Marksmanship is the Stern Guard strat for +1 to wound with special issue bolters. Veteran Intercessors is the same as Codex Space Marines, giving you 1 extra attack and a leadership bonus to Intercessors. It'll cost you 2 command points for the whole squad. Personally, I just use Death Company Intercessors if I wanted Intercessors that hit harder in close combat. Hero of the Chapter is a very important one for Blood Angels and lets you take a 2nd Warlord trait on a different character that isn't your Warlord. A very nice Blood Angels Codex Warlord trait is Artisan of War, which will give you a +1 to your damage rolls provided you're not using a relic. So with this plus the mastercrafted weapon, you could have 2 Smash Captains kicking around with damage for Thunderhammers if you'd like, or even just damage D3 +1 Power Fists, it's all good. Steady Advance is move and fire as if stationary for Bolter Discipline with infantry. Honoured by Baal is a stratagem to give you a Blood Angels only relic if you're a successor chapter, so the Flesh Tearers might want to make use of this, though in my opinion the gems and the relics lie in the special issue War Gear section. Adaptive Strategy can let you combat squad mid-game, and Gene Wrought Might will give a Primaris unit a nice combat bonus for rolling 6s to hit, and you could certainly combine this with Intercessors or Death Company Intercessors to have a massive stack of buffs on a unit with a lot of attacks. Continuing from the main codex, for 2 CP we have Rapid Fire. This will let your bolt rifle armed Intercessors fire as if the guns were rapid fire too. Transhuman Physiology could certainly be good on some of our fighty assault units, particularly when you absolutely need a squad of Death Company or Sanguinary Guard to weather as much of the storm as possible and hopefully charge the enemy anew the following turn. Vengeance of the Machine Spirits could be used to explode a Repulsor or say a Storm Raven. This could be particularly good if you fly one of these guys into the midst of the enemy and then they destroy it. Mortal wounds all round sounds like fun to me. Finally, Hammer of Wrath will give you mortal wounds on a roll of 5 up for each model in a jump pack unit that makes a successful charge within 1 inch of the enemy. as we can get up to 15-man Death Company squads. If you're absolutely looking to maximise all the damage you can do, then this could be good for up to an average of 5 mortal wounds when you make the charge. Possibly more worth it in Blood Angels than other Space Marines codexes. Finally, Bolt Storm is the 2 command point stratagem to let Assault Bolter intercessors auto hit when they're within half range. Not bad, but a bit pricey for the damage output that it brings, though Assault Bolter intercessors are certainly a unit that synergizes well with the Blood Angels. Finally, for the main Space Marine stratagems, we have Target Sighted, which is 3 command points to give a Stalker Bolter intercessor squad the ability to shoot characters and the mortal wounds on 6s rule. And now we get into the fun stuff, which is the Blood Angels unique stratagems that are new for this book, and we have 6 of them. Firstly, we have Visage of the Damned. This is 1 command point, and you use it in the fight phase on a Blood Angels unit that has the Death Mask ability, so something like either Sanguinary Guard or Chapter Master Dante. Until the end of the fight phase, the unit that's attacking the Blood Angels unit with the Death Masks has -1 to hit. This is a reasonable survivability boost for Sanguinary Guard in melee, though typically I think that our main threat comes from when the enemy falls back from melee and then shoots the crap out of them. I'd say that this will be most useful in a protracted combat. Next up, we have Refusal to Die. You can use this in any phase that the Death Company are targeted with an attack. Until the end of that phase, when they take a wound, their Feel No Pain increases to a 5+. That's a fairly decent increase if you're expecting your entire Death Company squad to get wiped out in a turn. The way the maths works, provided you're not being hit by multi-damage weapons, is that 6-up Feel No Pain gives you a 20% survivability boost in total, and a 5-up Feel No Pain will give you a 50% durability increase in total, when you've accounted for the fact that you might keep on rolling 5-up saves forever. It's not a bad ability, but it's certainly a lot worse when you are being hit by multi-damage weapons. I'd say its best use is actually on a large squad of Death Company intercessors that you're sure that the enemy is going to try and remove that turn. You could waste a lot of their firepower by forcing them to chew through this boosted Feel No Pain save, and maybe provide the rest of your army with some respite. Next we have Death on the Wind, which is a powerful stratagem to buff the Sanguinary Guard. You use it in the fight phase, and until the end of the fight phase, every time you roll a 1 for damage for their weapons, whether it's their new cheaper Encarming Blades or their Power Fists, that roll of 1 becomes a 2 instead. When you math it out, provided you're hitting a multi-wound target, this actually is a 17% increase in damage output. So maths-wise, it's exactly the same proportionate boost they get from being in a Captain's aura for reroll 1s, for example. I'm a little bit conflicted about this. It would be nice if it was a little bit stronger, but if you're absolutely trying to squeeze every ounce of damage out of a unit, then you could combine this with various other character auras, stratagems and things, and do an absolute ton of damage with the Sanguinary Guard. Next we have Explosive Judgment, again for 1 command point. These have all been for 1 command point, by the way, the Blood Angels unique ones. You use this one in the shooting phase, and again it helps out the Sanguinary Guard. Their Angelus bolt guns get to reroll wounds and ignores cover for that shooting phase. Now this is an interesting little one. That's actually really quite a massive increase in damage output against a lot of targets. I guess the main issue is that you don't really buy them for the shooting. It's whether or not that massive increase is worth it on an otherwise not spectacular shooting unit. But I guess if you do need to put as much hurt as possible on a horde or some people entrenched in cover, it's certainly one to bear in mind. Next we have my favourite stratagem in the whole book. This is Unbridled Ardour, and this is actually a really strong boost to the Blood Angels army as a whole. Now it doesn't sound super powerful when you first hear it. Basically you use this in the charge phase for 1 command point. You pick 1 Blood Angels unit, and if it's within 6 inches of an enemy, it can heroically intervene as if it were a character, and when it does this heroic intervention, it can move 6 inches. Now this means that if your opponent puts a single unit within 6 inches of any Blood Angels unit in your army, you have the potential for a free charge with them, and just jump on whichever unit that is and start smacking them to bits with whatever chainswords or things you have available. If your opponent is charging other units in your lands, and you have a fighty character nearby, you could use this to get their heroic intervention range up to 6 inches, so whatever enemy unit that has just charged might suddenly find itself being hit by a Thunderhammer very hard. And what's more, if the enemy unit did charge, then it won't even be able to attack whichever unit that you've used to jump on them with this stratagem, unless they declared it as a target of the charge in the first place. The strongest use of this, though, would be if you could use it to get an entire massive heavy melee unit from the Blood Angels into assault. Say if the enemy thought they might be able to wipe out your unit of Sanguinary Guard, but 5 of them are still alive, and your opponent has positioned a shooter unit to take them out from close range. You can now not even have to wait for the next turn to charge, you don't have to take Overwatch, you can just heroically intervene straight into them, maybe kill them in your opponent's turn, and then let your fighter unit be able to go off and murder something else in your own turn. Even just the threat of this is powerful. It means that say if you have a big battle line of intercessors, for example, and your opponent isn't keen on getting in close combat with blood-mad intercessors with +1 to wound and potentially +2 attacks on the first round of combat, he'll not be able to put a single unit within 6 inches of any of your units, lest he risk the Blood Angels player activating this stratagem and piling in on whichever unit was nearby. As it's a heroic intervention type thing, it does have counterplay. If you do keep your units out of 6 inches, then this is never going to have effect, but you often do need to commit to fights, whether your opponent's charging you with a melee unit or trying to snag an objective by standing on it, and that happens to have to put him within 6 inches of your units. This is essentially a 1 command point stratagem that every so often will net you an absolutely free charge, and free charges are about the best thing that Blood Angels can possibly ask for. So now we've raved about that for 2 minutes, we'll go on to the last stratagem, which is Chalice Overflowing, which is a 1 command point stratagem for using your apothecary to heal twice in the same movement phase. Could maybe be handy if he's patching up 1 unit, then use his second activation to heal a unit from the dead. Might be handy, but on the whole I think that this is better used on big hefty units such as Devastated Centurions, and that's not a unit that the Blood Angels have massive synergy with. Might be handy in a jam. If you brought an apothecary, I wouldn't plan on using it every turn though. So last up in terms of the rules for the review is our look at the Flesh Tearers. Basically the Flesh Tearers are a successor chapter to the Blood Angels, and they work a very similar way to the Crimson Fists work to the Imperial Fists. They have a slightly different chapter trait that retains some elements of the other chapter. They get access to all of the stratagems and warlord traits of the parent chapter, and the special issue war gear, but are locked out of the higher value relics and can't take any of the special characters, such as say Mephiston or Lamates or Asterath for example. Of course the Flesh Tearers get Seth instead, and he's a very nasty little melee beatstick. We might certainly do a review of him at some point soon. For now though, let's take a look at the Flesh Tearers' core rules. Their chapter tactic is Fury Within, so this is similar to Red Thirst in that it gives you the +1 to wound roll on the first round of close combat, but instead of +1 to advance and charge, it gives you an additional pip of AP on each unmodified wound roll of a 6. Now this isn't a bad little buff to damage, and funnily enough it will actually mean that Flesh Tearers units in a vacuum will hit harder than Blood Angels units do, but of course it'll mean that they won't make quite as many charges as their Blood Angels counterparts do, so I guess there are positives and negatives. If you could pretty much guarantee a charge via overlapping buffs such as say Chaplain auras and other rerolls, then obviously this means that Flesh Tearers will be the ones to go for, but that +1 to charge rolls from Blood Angels generally is very helpful, and I suspect it will come up more often than you'd expect. Overall, while the chapter trait is important, I think it's not quite as important as the access to special characters and the other options for warlord traits and relics and things. Their warlord traits are Merciless Butcher, which is +1 attack for every 5 models within 3 inches of them in the fight phase. This is honestly a bit rubbish. It might mean that you get +1 attack every so often, but it's not going to be all that often that you're within 10 models within that tiny aura of 3 inches. If this had been 6 inches it might have been a bit more worth it, but as it is I'm not impressed. Gabriel Seth gets this, and is quite a good reason not to make him your warlord, because it isn't very good. Secondly, we have Of Wrath and Rage, which is quite a bit better in terms of a combat buff. Basically for each unmodified 6 that you roll to hit in melee, then you get an additional attack with the same weapon. This maths out at a +17% damage increase again, so is a very reliable little buff that makes your fighty character hit that bit harder in all situations. Thirdly, we have Cretation Born, which is plain and simple, you can't overwatch this character. Now no overwatch is a very powerful ability, and this could easily be worth it on a Smash Captain, particularly if you buy it in with Hero of the Chapter against certain list, particularly things like Iron Hands, Ultramarines and Tau. Obviously it's not quite as good as the Angel's Wing relic, but that's limited to Blood Angels, so if you're a Flesh Tearer, I'm afraid you can't get it. I think of Wrath and Rage and Cretation Born are both decent. Of Wrath and Rage is better in all matchups, but Cretation Born could be absolutely key in certain matchups. They have 2 relics. First, the Severer of Threads. This is a relic chainsword that gives you plus D3 attacks, with strength +1, AP -1, damage 1, and if you roll a 6 to wound, then it generates a mortal wound in addition to its normal damage. This mainly just makes me wish for the Teeth of Terror, which is flatly better, and it would be very nice if Blood Angels could borrow that relic for a bit from the main Space Marines book. This one honestly isn't a great option in my opinion. If you're tooling up a fighty character, give them some actual proper war gear that has multi-damage and better AP than this. Leave the chainswording to Seth, who's very good at it. Secondly, we have Sorrow's Genesis. This is a relic for an apothecary, and it's quite a good one. You basically heal 3 wounds flat instead of rolling for D3 wounds when you heal a character or infantry model. And if you're rolling to see if you're getting a squad member back up from the dead, then you pass it on a 2-up and the squad member comes back with up to 3 wounds still remaining. This is actually a really quite strong buff on an apothecary, and it would combine very well with the Chalice Overflows stratagem to make him into a bit of a healing machine. Maybe with the 2 combined, perhaps tagging along with some Assault Centurions or something, then he could make his points back. But when you're taking apothecaries, it's always very tempting just to invest it in more actual damage dealing units. The Flesh Tearers have 2 unique stratagems. 2 CP is Savage Destruction, which could have the potential to be decent for morale purposes. Basically, for every model slain, it counts as 2 casualties when you're calculating the morale test. So say if your Flesh Tearers caused 5 casualties on an Orc mob, then it would count as them having suffered 10 casualties for the purpose of morale. The main problem I see with this is that if it's worth 2 command points to make them fail a leadership check badly, then it's probably worth your opponent just paying the 2 command points to auto-pass that morale check. Therefore, I'd be very surprised if you ever see more return on the 2 command points than your opponent is happy to take, because they will have the option of either just leaving it and sucking up the casualties if they don't care, or paying the 2 command points if they do care, and therefore both sides lose 2 command points, and you've not gained anything. So I'd say that this one's almost certainly going to be a pass for me in pretty much every situation. Their second stratagem is a small but potentially useful one. Aggressive Onslaught just makes a unit pile in 6 inches after fighting. The main reason I'd use this is if, say, you have a Flesh Tearer's infantry unit that's just butchered a screening unit and you need an extra 3 inches to pile into a tank to stop it from firing the next turn, then this could well be worth it. It's a good thing to have in the toolbox, potentially useful, and you only have to pay the command point when you need it. Overall, I think that the Flesh Tearers have a strong chapter trait, and Gabriel Seth is pretty powerful a character, but their warlord traits, relics and stratagems aren't particularly overwhelming. Overall, I'd personally take the Blood Angels myself, but I could certainly see certain builds doing just as well with Flesh Tearers, particularly trying to exploit more damaging melee units than the Blood Angels have, all other things being equal. So that brings us to the end of all of the rules. So what's the overall take on Blood of Baal? Improved chapter trait for both chapters is great. The Assault Doctrine is potentially very strong, but limited to turn 3, which is a shame. Chaplain litanies are a massive boon for the Blood Angels, particularly trying to get them into close combat. Mephiston and the character chaplains are all decently priced and can provide powerful buffs to your army. Death Company intercessors are stronger than their regular counterparts, though occupy an elite slot. I really like the Icon of the Angel, the Quake Bolts, mastercrafted weapons, and gleaming pinions from the relic section. Gaining access to a bunch of the stratagems from the Space Marine Codex is great, particularly Hero of the Chapter and Duty Eternal, and the Blood Angel's unique Heroic Intervention stratagem for any infantry is absolutely mad, and should have your opponents rightfully fearing the Blood Angels and not want to be anywhere near them. Overall, I think that this is a decent buff for the Blood Angels, particularly when combined with all of the points cuts they just got in Chapter Approved, which I have done a video on if you're interested. I'll be reviewing some of the unique Blood Angels units over the next couple of weeks. If there's any unit that you're particularly interested in me starting with, please let me know down in the comments. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more content like this, and to support me on Patreon if you'd like to help the channel, because making these videos takes freaking ages, and particularly 40-minute long book reviews. Overall though, it's been really good to see what the Blood Angels have to offer. I look forward to seeing how they do going on over the next few months. Thanks for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.